Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of September 25th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles. They analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and sudden increase in movement in the market. So think of these 5 books as the most liquid this past week. But before I get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, do one of those things, I'd appreciate it. But let us get into this video here today. Now, of course, this article is written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description, but I will do my best to break it down. And coming in here at the number 5 spot, just squeaking in the list, is a very cool modern spec book right here. We got ourselves 8 Billion Genies #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 98th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 2022, written by Charles Soule, that would be the first issue of the new independent series called 8 Billion Genies. Now, when this book came out, it was one of those big spec books of the week. There were tons of retail variant covers, other variant covers, second printings, third printings. I think this even went to like a 5th printing or something like that. But this was one of those books that a lot of people just instantly pegged as being a property that would absolutely get optioned to an Amazon or a Netflix. And you know how people do in the comic book market, everybody is thinking, okay, what's going to be the next, The Boys show? What's going to be the next Walking Dead? And so everybody's looking for these independent titles. And I got to say, with the premise of 8 Billion Genies, it absolutely has Netflix written all over it, which caused a lot of people to think that this was a surefire bet. And now we're currently at a point where it's been long enough of a time, the rumor and the hypes have sort of died down, and people are starting to think, hey, maybe now is a good time to buy back into this book, which is why it is putting it on the list this week. I mean, I do think that at some point in the future, there will probably be news about this book getting optioned. But again, in other videos, I've had discussions about, option properties and things like that. And, it's really a few years away and multiple seasons away from this book ever really going to the moon. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's zoom in here and take a look at them here together. 914 universal copies on the census. Don't be confused though, because the 9/8 actually have 795, which is a very high 9/8 rate, considering how many books were submitted. Plus, there's tons of variants and tons of other printings of this book. Fair market value is $95. 30-day moving is 81. And as you can see, this was a book that really shot up, in the pre-screen 9/8s, coming out of the gate at 130, jumped all the way up to 190 back in August of 2022, and now has kind of sunk all the way back down to that $62 range, maybe that $88 range. And that's really one of the reasons why people are probably buying back into this book heavily, because hey, with your cost basis at $62, it's really not too bad overall. Might as well give this one a roll of the dice. Then down here at the bottom, not going to see it slapped at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this book, typically you can find them being sold around that $20, $25, maybe $30 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is definitely another interesting one, a DC spec book right here. We got ourselves Batman number 357, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 82nd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1983, written by Gary Conway, that would feature the second cameo appearance of Killer Croc, but more importantly, the first appearance of the character Jason Todd. Now, we've spoken many times about the James Gunn effect on DC comic books. Now, there hasn't been any sort of confirmation or hint that we are going to be getting Jason Todd, but being that he has such an important connection to, Bruce Wayne Batman, at one point being Robin, at another point being the Red Hood, Jason Todd is a very important character to the Batman mythos, and you have to think at some point down the line, we are going to see James Gunn bring Jason Todd into the fold, if in fact James Gunn is able to realize his DC universe, which of course at this point is a long ways away from actually coming to fruition, but that doesn't stop comic book collectors for rolling the dice on this one. And this is one of those books that I think is kind of an interesting one. I mean, it's going to be hard for this one to really ever go to the moon, being that it's a 1983 book. I mean, there's a lot of copies out there. There's also a lot of competition in this book. Do you like the Jason Todd book? Do you like it when Jason Todd becomes Robin? Do you like it when he becomes the Red Hood? I mean, which book are you actually going after? Which book does the market actually want? It's going to come down to which character appearance actually happens on the silver screen. But regardless, still a fun book to have in the collection. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 2,235 universal copies, 2,300 total graded. 9/8s have 270 on the census, so not the easiest 9/8 book to get. Fair market value is $675. 30-day moving is $595. 1 year $822. And this is a really interesting book when you look at the graph. I mean, it's been relatively flat for many, many years, going all the way back to 2015, just as valuable in 2015 as it was in 2020. So it's not really a book that produces any sort of ROI, but the floor value is pretty consistent. I mean, a lot of people just want to have this book at the 9.8 level. So that does say one thing, about this key. I think this had definitely jumped up quite a bit during the comic book boom of 2021 and 2022. And I think it's falling right back down into that line at the $500 level, $595 on the 30-day, where people are thinking like, hey, I was buying this book for $500 back in 2015. I might as well buy this book for $500 here in 2023, being that the 9.8s are only 12% of the actual census. And then, of course, the values fall off to the $120 level, $180 level at the 9.6 and 9.0. You're not going to see it slabbed too often at the low grade because it is a Copper Age book. But when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $20, $25, maybe $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is another interesting kind of spec book right here. But we got ourselves Masters of the Universe #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 60th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1982, written by Paul Kupperberg, that would feature the first full issue of Masters of the Universe written in comic book form. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely loved He-Man growing up. This was one of the banger properties from back in the day. And I think a lot of comic book collectors are interested in the Masters of the Universe being that, there's a lot of hype right now around Transformers. There's a lot of hype around G.I. Joe. And as Matt points out in the article, comic book collectors, they see, blood in the water with Transformers properties getting hot and G.I. Joe things going on in the movie world. And they think to themselves, hey, maybe Masters of the Universe is next in line, being that these were all sort of Hasbro toys and related to each other back in the day. And a lot of people like this comic book right here because it's effectively the #1 issue for this series. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 1,932 universal copies. There's actually 199 on the census. That is kind of an interesting one to keep our eyes on if it ever goes up for sale. 9.8s have 529 on the census. Fair market value is 270. 30-day moving is 219. And let's take a look at the graph here together. I think this is a book that has not really had too much of a return on investment. As you can see, much like the previous graph that we looked at for the Jason Todd book, this is one that has been relatively flat. I mean, all the way back in 2013, it was about a $100 book, maybe a $130 book, and you could go all the way up to 2020, and that was basically the same case with this one. So, a pretty flat book overall that didn't get inflated until the hype of 2021 when people were paying, $800, $700 for this thing. And, I think it's taken a long time for this one to, die back down to now where it sells around that $188, $175, $200 level. We're kind of basically in line to the trend, although this book has never really been a book that has trended. Maybe this book is going to go all the way back down to that $100 price point because there's so many books out there. There's lots of collections that are coming up, and there's lots of raw books that, you're still going to be able to grab of this one and get yourself a 9.8. Then, of course, down at the bottom, I'm not going to see it slab the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically you see them being sold around that $15, $20, maybe $25 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is a classic book right here, a classic cover. We got ourselves Uncanny XMen #268, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 51st spot. How's that for a jump in the hot list right there? And what is the significance of this one? Of course, this is the book that came out in 1990, written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Jim Lee, that would feature the classic Jim Lee cover and the first team up of Black Widow, Captain America, and Wolverine. Now, of course, you guys know this book right here, just one of the great Jim Lee covers, when he was really making a name for himself in the early 90s. This is one of those books that every comic book collector wants to have in their collection. It looks great on a shelf, especially in that 9.8 slab. And this is an interesting one because, as Matt points out in the article, it's been recently announced that Chris Claremont is actually going to pick up where this story left off in a new comic book, which has given a lot of comic book collectors a lot of interest in this book once again. Anytime you can have any sort of modern comic book current stuff that is going on that actually moves secondary market values, I think that that's always very, very exciting. It's better that, comic books can actually get people excited about comic books rather than, movies always having the driving factor into what gets people excited about comic books. But very, very interesting with this one. We'll see where it goes. I don't know if this is ever one that's going to be, a long-term future book, but as far as, some of the best covers to come out during this time, I definitely think that this one belongs in the running, and you never really know. I mean, maybe in the MCU, when we get all these characters back in Secret Wars, we'll have a moment like this. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 2,510 universal copies. Don't let that be confused, though. There's definitely a lot of copies out there. That census number could go up tremendously if, at a certain point, this book does become, a chase book. 9.9s actually have 2 on the census. 9.8s have 553, fair market value 290, 30-day moving 281. And you guys can see this is another book that, has always had a little bit of demand. Maybe it has sort of trended up throughout the years. Back in 2014, it was a $63 book, has kind of gone up into a $100 book during 2016. And then, in 2018, it was a $120 book. So it has had a slow and steady increase over the years, shot up like every book in COVID, and then kind of has, dove back down to that sort of $220 price point, maybe $280. But overall is in a place where I think a lot of comic book collectors are starting to feel comfortable with this price point at the 9.8 level. Once again, of course, 9.8s are 22% of the top of census. So, not the hardest book to get in 9.8, but not the easiest one either. Then, of course, down here at the bottom, I'm not going to see it slapped the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $15, $20, maybe $25 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is a book that everybody is familiar with, everybody's favorite comic book in the comic book collecting market. Of course, we're talking about Venom Lethal Protector number 3, up 1 spot, now in the number 3 spot, the number 3 most bought and sold comic out there in the market right now. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1993, written by David Michelinie. That would be the first Venom solo title and feature that iconic and classic red shiny cover. Now, of course, you guys know the character of Venom, one of the great creations in the Spider-Man mythos back in ASM 300. And Venom at this particular time was an absolutely massive character. I mean, to this day, Venom is still one of the most popular superhero characters out there. I guess anti-heroes is what you would actually call him. And when he got this book back in 1993, it was a big deal. I remember everybody was buying up this issue. I myself might have purchased like 10 copies thinking I was going to go to the moon with this one. But here today, it's not necessarily a book that takes you to the moon, but it is a book that everybody wants in a 9.8 on their shelf. Even outside of this Go Collect hot list, this is a book that always sells. I mean, I'd say next to Spawn number 1, Venom number 1 is maybe consistently one of the most selling books in the secondary market at all times. So always going to be popular in the market, always going to be one that is desired. And this time, now jumping up 1 spot, is in the top 3 most bought and sold books right now. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 16,904 universal copies, 20,000 total graded out there, and there's probably another 100,000 ready to get submitted once we get Venom number 3. 10s actually have 10 on the census. So there's actually a few 10.0s. Hasn't been a sale since 2017, but I feel like that person who bought it for $550 did themselves a favor with that one. 9.9s actually have 36 on the census. Last sale for that was actually not too long ago at the $3,600 price point. So definitely, if you're somebody who really wants to, say, invest in a book like this, you definitely have to get yourself a 9.9 or a 10.0. 9.8s have 9,029 in the census. Fair market value is 130. 30-day moving is 140. Of course, this is a book that was made with that heavy cardstock. So while spine ticks do show up on this thing, it is also not too difficult to get it in a 9.8. I mean, if you bought this book off the rack and you put it in a bag and board, chances are it is still in 9.8 condition. And as you guys can see, not necessarily a book that, has had a consistent return on investment. I mean, shot up in 2018 due to movie hype, came back down to earth, shot up for 2021 COVID boom. And now kind of where it sits, $100 price point. I feel like, $100 9.8, no matter how many are on the census, you're never going to get too hurt overall for that price, being that this is just a cool book to have in the collection. Then, of course, down here at the bottom, I'm not going to see it slapped the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $15, maybe $20 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade that you can find for yourself. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Of course, like, comment, subscribe. See y'all in the next one.